Thank you very much, and welcome, everybody. So much attention has been devoted to the tragic final year of Anne Boleyn's life. The miscarriages, the accusations of adultery and witchcraft, and the final moments up to and including the French swordsman. The music that we are going to hear tonight, however, takes us to the very beginning of Anne Boleyn's story, her girlhood. Anne Boleyn spent her formative years in the Low Countries and France. Her education and experience at these European courts were intended to set her up for a glittering marriage back home in England. And they also shaped her cultural preferences and intellectual interests, making her the perfect intellectual and cultural as well as romantic match for Henry VIII. At some point during her time on the continent, Anne acquired a songbook containing 39 Latin motets and 3 French chansons. The contents of this songbook, from which the musicians in ordinary have assembled tonight's concert, together produce a picture of sober application to the study of music, French as well as Latin, of intense religious devotion, and of lifelong bonds with other girls and women forged over books and music. A far cry from popular representations of the French court as a hotbed of flirtation and intrigue. Anne Boleyn began her European education with a 15-month stay at the court of Margaret of Austria, Duchess of Savoy and Regent of the Netherlands in Mechelen, Belgium. Anne next served as a lady-in-waiting at the French court, first as a lady-in-waiting to Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, who was briefly married to the French king, Louis XII, and next at Blois, in the household of Claude de France, spouse of François Ier, Henry VIII's great frenemy. Anne's precise age at the time of her voyage to the continent is complicated by the as yet unresolved question of her birth date. Many scholars believe she was born circa 1501, while some maintain that it was as late as 1507. A major piece of evidence in this debate is a letter that Anne wrote to her father in French, circa 1514, now Corpus Christi College manuscript, number 119. I shall read from it now. First, in her idiosyncratic early modern French, which sounds somewhat strange to modern ears, and then in English translation. And I shall leave it to you to judge if you think this is the voice of a 7-year-old or a 13-year-old. Does it reflect the concerns of a child or an ambitious teenager? Monsieur, j'ai entendu par votre lettre que avez envie que tous honnêtes femmes quand je viendrai à la courte et m'avertissent que la reine prendra la peine de déviser avec moi, de quoi me rejoint bien fort de penser parler avec une personne tant sage et honnête. Cela me fera avoir plus grand envie de continuer à parler bien français. Sir, I understand from your letter that you desire me to be an entirely virtuous woman when I come to the court. And you tell me that the Queen will take the trouble to converse with me, and it gives me great joy to think of talking with such a wise and virtuous person. This will make me all the keener to persevere in speaking French well. Anne here refers to her father's suggestion, which in retrospect seems completely amazing, that Queen Catherine, la reine, had the intention of asking Anne Boleyn for French lessons when she returned to England. Anne's spelling is eccentric. It reflects an English speaker sorting out its nascent bilingualism. But her thoughts seem very sophisticated. She imagines herself as a virtuous woman conversing with the Queen, impressing her with her excellent French. I'll read just a little bit more. Monsieur, je vous supplie d'excuser si ma lettre est mal écrite, car je vous assure qu'être orthographie de mon entendement, seul la un. Les autres ne sont faits que écrits de ma main. Et Sémonet me dit, de la lettre me demeura fin, je le fis moi-même. Écrite à verre de votre très humble et très obéisse fille, Anne de Boleyn. Sir, I beg you to excuse me if my letter is badly written, for I assure you that the spelling is from my understanding alone, whereas the others were only written by my hand. And Sémonet tells me the letter will wait unless I do it myself, written at Veurs by your very humble and obedient daughter, Anne de Boleyn. Here we see that the young Anne has taken dictation from her teacher Simonet, who tutored all of the children under Margaret of Austria's care. The idea is that in the past he had written out letters for her to copy, but now he expects her to write it on her own. Simonet's active guidance at this stage in her education may lead some to conclude that Anne was 6 or 7 instead of 13 or 14, although dictation, la dictée, is a common pedagogical exercise for developing a good ear at any level, either way. This was her first year in France. Anne's letter was written in La Veur, the 700-acre royal park near Brussels, with a palace and a hunting lodge, now known as Tervuren, where Margaret of Austria spent her summers as she oversaw the education of the Archduke Charles, future Prince of Castile, and later the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, as well as his sisters Eleanor, Isabeau, and Marie, who became the queens of Portugal and later France, and of Denmark and of Hungary. Thomas Boleyn would have jumped at the opportunity for his daughter to be educated in this environment. And as a diplomat, he would have relished the pretext it provided him to visit Anne, along with Margaret of Austria, his new friend, and all those darling little future heads of state. Margaret's court at Mechelen was, as one contemporary letter puts it, a school for princes and a center for high culture. It was known for its choir and musicians, its collections of books and art, and for the writers and artists who were drawn to it. And Margaret, for her part, seems to have enjoyed having Anne. In her letter to Thomas Boleyn, who was known to have had the best French of all the English courtiers, she describes Anne as so bright and pleasant for her young age that I am more beholden to you for sending her than you are to me. Anne's stay in Europe was extended because Henry VIII's sister Mary, recently married to the French King Louis XII, wanted her badly as a lady-in-waiting. And so Sir Thomas delicately negotiated his daughter's redeployment from a Habsburg to a French court. This was awkward for various reasons. To marry Louis XII, the 17-year-old Mary Tudor had broken her long engagement to the young Habsburg Charles, Margaret's charge, because Henry VIII had told her to marry the much older French king instead. Louis XII was some 65 years her senior, and he died only 11 weeks into the marriage. It was also awkward because Margaret of Austria, since the age of 3, had been engaged to the previous French king, Charles VIII. He had broken it off with her to marry Margaret's stepmother, Anne de Bretagne, who then went on to marry Louis XII, who, after she died, married Mary Tudor. But in the household of Mary Tudor, Anne would no longer be a student but a teacher. Sir Thomas explained to Margaret that the French that Anne, known as La Petite Boleyn, had refined at her court would help to improve Mary Tudor's less than perfect French, describing her as non ayant la langage parfaitement. We can see then that Anne's girlhood experiences were defined by a system of women overseeing, facilitating, and supporting each other's education within the contexts of dynastic marriage. The young Margaret of Austria had been raised as a fille de France at the French royal court, with her education supervised by the sister of her fiancé, the powerful Anne de France, known as Madame la Grande. And Margaret went on to perform this role for her young nieces and nephew and for Anne Boleyn. Anne herself was being groomed to be the tutor and companion for her own queen, Catherine of Aragon, before she joined the household of Mary Tudor. When Mary returned to England with her new husband, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, her brother had promised her she could choose her next husband. Anne Boleyn spent the following 6 years in the company of other royal women who became her good friends. Queen Claude, daughter of Louis XII and Anne de Bretagne, born 1499, and her sister Renée, born 1510. Depending on whether you assign Anne Boleyn's birth date to 1501 or 1507, she was a close contemporary of one or the other sister. During this time, Anne honed her musical skills on the lute and virginals and as a singer. All of the written records that describe this time in Anne's life make the point that she was an excellent dancer, an excellent singer, and musician. She had the opportunity to perform in court theatricals and was present at the famous French-English rapprochement, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. These years at the French court set the stage for Anne's early encounters with Henry VIII upon her return to England, where her musical and dance skills were greatly admired. She danced in the Chateau Vert pageant at York House, one of Wolsey's palaces, where she got to first dance with the king. Anne brought back to England from her travels our songbook, now Royal College of Music, manuscript 1070, which contains the music that the musicians in ordinary are performing tonight. Anne Boleyn inscribed her name inside the book, along with her father's motto, Mistress Anne Boleyn, now thus, with a mark of 3 short notes and 1 long. Scholars have interpreted this mark, 3 short notes and 1 long, as a musical way of interpreting her age, perhaps the age she was when she acquired the manuscript, 3 years plus 10. For many years, the manuscript was considered to be English in origin. One scholar argued that it had been given to Anne by her alleged lover, the court lutenist, Mark Smeaton, and he regarded it as a reflection of the broken life of Anne Boleyn. But more recent research has argued that Anne acquired the manuscript during her girlhood, spent on the continent. After all, the music was written on French paper, boasts numerous fanciful initials, all in the French style, and contains music that had been popular in the French and Burgundian courts some 15 to 20 years before Anne's alleged affair with the lutenist and subsequent fall. In fact, all of the motets in the manuscript are by Franco-Flemish composers directly associated with the courts of Claude de France and Margaret of Austria. 10 of the songs are by Josquin des Prés, a singer and composer at the French court of Louis XII, who was also admired and possibly employed by Margaret of Austria. 9 are by the French court composer Jean Mouton, favored by Anne de Bretagne, Claude's mother, and was likely present at the Field of the Cloth of Gold. He composed his Non Nobis Domine for the birth of little Renée. Moreover, the manuscript is small and written on good, but not the very best paper. The hands are professional, but not always of the top quality. Many scribal errors are amended, suggesting that the manuscript had been used in performance. Workmanly, not too fancy, clearly put together by a genuine aficionado. This is not a manuscript produced with all the trouble and expense associated with a royal presentation copy. In other words, it was perfect for a kid. The manuscript mostly contains motets. These are polyphonic musical compositions. The songs contain multiple independent melodies. Because of its musical complexity, the polyphonic motet was described by one medieval writer as not intended for the vulgar who do not understand its finer points and derive no pleasure from hearing it. It is meant for educated people and for those who look for refinement in art. Motets are sung in a group. If you were to look at the manuscript, you would see that the organization of its pages, its mise en page, open up into 4 different parts so that a group can sing them together. And this is how we can imagine Anne and her friends singing their different parts. The songs in Anne Boleyn's songbook are primarily religious, with the Virgin Mary a major focus. Tonight we will hear Josquin des Prés' famous Ave Maria, one of the greatest songs, greatest hits of the Renaissance, addressed to the Serene Virgin. As a document of Marian devotion, the songbook contrasts interestingly with Anne's key role in the Protestant Reformation, just a generation after the songs were composed, a Reformation which strenuously suppressed the worship of the Virgin Mary. Anne's signature appears on a page on the manuscript that contains a motet about the Annunciation to the Virgin by Loisé Compère, Paranymphis Salutat Virginem. The songbook's overarching focus on the Virgin also allows for a broader celebration of female beauty. Antoine Brumel's appropriation of the Song of Songs, Sicut Lilium inter spinas, or As the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. It extends, of course, to celebrations of motherhood as well, with songs such as the celebrated composer Jakob Obrecht's Alma Redemptoris Mater, Loving Mother of the Redeemer, and O Genetrix Gloriosa, O Glorious Parent. Nestled in among these religious motets can be found the odd secular dance song, such as the famous Renaissance drinking song, Gentil galant, compagnon de raisin, gallant companions of the grape, and Jouissance vous donnerai by Claudin de Sermézy, based on words by Clément Marot, with its odd premonitory concluding line, Tout vient à point qui peut attendre. Everything comes to a point where you can wait. We know, of course, that Anne Boleyn was the original Waity Katie. But this odd premonition has nothing on the truly eerie words of Jean Mouton's In Illo Tempore, which asks in Latin the question, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? And provides an answer that Henry VIII consistently disregarded. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. The key to Anne's charm for Henry VIII was her detailed knowledge of this French and Burgundian court culture and of the music and arts and theatrical entertainments that Henry admired and adored. In this, she outshone her predecessor, the pious Catherine. In fact, in order to impress her, Henry VIII's letters to Anne Boleyn started in French, and then, when their relationship was more established, switched to English. Anne Boleyn's letters, unfortunately, do not survive, but Henry's do. They can be found in the Vatican Library. Henry is a completely different person in these two languages. In French, he is solicitous of Anne's health and well-being, filled with poetic effusions, apologetic for his linguistic failings, although his French really is not that bad. The vocabulary of these letters is the vocabulary of desire. Cœur, amour, corps, ami, vous, espère, écrire, plaisir, temps, santé, absence. References to astronomy situate their relationship as Petrarchan lovers and within the metaphysical notions of fate and fortune. In English, however, Henry barks out orders about when and where to meet, offers updates on practical matters, and shares news of fellows such as Master Brown and John Cock, the apothecary, killed by the sweating sickness. In French, Henry sends a delicate bracelet with his picture in miniature inside. In English, like a 6-foot-tall cat coming in with a mouse, he offers Anne the flesh of a buck newly killed. The Anne who emerges in the context of these letters is different too. In French, she is constructed as having the upper hand, and Henry swears to be her servant forever. In English, she is the object of his lust, as he confesses his desire to kiss her pretty Dorcas. And in English as well, she just has all this meat to cook. French then was the language of Anne's girlhood, the language in which Anne and Henry were happy as a couple, the language of Anne's ongoing intellectual life. The French author Lois Lebrun observed she was never to be found without some French book in her hand. And Anne's chaplain, William Latimer, praised her as very expert in the French tongue, exercising herself continually in reading the French Bible and other French books. This is an intellectual side of Anne that is seldom, if ever, represented in the popular imagination. In Wolf Hall, Anne's French education mainly focuses on what Hilary Mantel calls Anne's filthy French tricks. In The Other Boleyn Girl, it is reduced to the upper-class equivalent of reform school, where Anne is sent by her angry father as a punishment for misbehaving. And the Tudors miniseries seems to sidestep it in favor of a fictitious plot related to a king of Portugal. The Victorian Agnes Strickland's Lives of the Queens of England pays more attention to what Anne Boleyn wore than to what she read. But we have seen tonight how Anne's seriousness as a student is reflected in her own accounts of her experiences on the continent and in the words of those who witnessed and admired her commitment. And the songs that the musicians of Ordinary will be performing tonight together offer a testament to the musical education and abilities of Anne Boleyn, and remind us that before she was a royal mistress and then a queen, she was a gifted and musical little girl. Thank you.